The NBA All-Star Game for the first time hosted by the capital city of Utah.
The NBA All-Star celebration is back in Utah for the first time in 30 years.
Stockton for three, and the home crowd loves that.
In 1993, Phil Johnson was in Utah as Jerry Sloan's assistant coach. But when it came to that All-Star weekend,
I didn't go to it then. I'm not an All-Star kind of guy.
Instead, Phil was in Idaho visiting his father.
And my father was sick when it was here before, and so I drove to Idaho through a snowstorm to get to see him, and it was the last time I saw him fairly healthy.
Phil rarely missed basketball games. It was always his passion, starting as a boy in Grace, Idaho. When did you first pick up a basketball? Do you remember? I
actually took ice cream cases and nailed them on the top of the door casing, and shoot basketballs up there. So I was very little. We didn't have an indoor toilet until I was 12 years old. We didn't have television until I was a junior in high school. Didn't have a telephone until I was a junior in high school.
At Grace Junior High and High School, Phil was coached by Utah native Dick Motta, who became a longtime NBA head coach. Phil left Grace with several scholarship offers and the chance to be the first in his family to attend college.
I chose Utah State because it was closer to home. It was 70 miles.
Phil went from Utah State to Weber College and then back to Logan for his final 2 seasons. It was there where he met his future wife, Ann.
Yeah, you'd go to Arctic Circle and get a ham and cheese, and that was the highlight of the whole week.
Not long after they were married, Phil became Weber State's head coach, leading the Wildcats to 3 straight conference titles. In 1971, they moved to Chicago when Coach Motta brought him in as his assistant with the Bulls. One player on that roster, Jerry Sloan.
He's the most amazing player I'd ever been around because his intensity was just unbelievable.
Maybe it was fate for Phil and Jerry, a duo that would wind up on the same bench again twice. But first, there were other stops along the way. In 1973, Phil became Kansas City's head coach, winning Coach of the Year honors 2 years later. In 1979, he returned to Chicago, this time as Jerry's assistant. After both were fired, Frank Layden hired Phil to assist him with the Jazz.
He was a genius, and I mean that. I don't say that lightly because I suppose there's a lot of people out there. But a lot of the things that you're seeing in the NBA now, the high pick and roll, using the big men up high and this stuff, that's all things that Phil implemented with us.
Soon after, Phil was off again, heading back to Kansas City as the head coach, a team that would eventually move to Sacramento.
And so I resigned with Frank here in Utah and went back there, and he said, "Who do you think should replace you?" And I said, "Jerry Sloan." He said, "Would you mind calling him for me?" So I called Jerry to be Frank's assistant to replace me.
Frank had stepped down, Jerry stepped up, and Phil stepped in again as Jerry's assistant, and the rest is Utah Jazz history. For the next 23 years, they formed an unbreakable bond, one created thanks to similar upbringings.
We were both the youngest in our family. We grew up on farms. We grew up and didn't have a lot of money, so our backgrounds were very similar.
Throughout his career, Phil was voted top NBA assistant 4 times, and though he was also a Coach of the Year, he settled in as Jerry's right-hand man.
Even though he was a Coach of the Year and he was successful as a head coach, his real success came when he was an assistant. And I mean, very few people remember Johnny Wooden's assistants or whatever it is, Tommy Lasorda's assistants. They only remember who the head person was. But there was no doubt about it that he had a great influence on me, certainly.
I would say the trust. I'm the person I am, and Coach Johnson is a huge part of that. I had all the tools, and it started with Coach Johnson, and I just love him.
I think Phil could have been a head coach as long as he wanted to be, right? So it says a lot about him that he would make that commitment to Jerry to be his right hand. Phil was an amazing X's and O's guy. Jerry would go to him in certain situations offensively. Sometimes Phil would just step up and coach when we're sitting on the bench and tell us what to get into.
You don't want to be the head coach, but you want to have input. And Jerry really, really accepted me because he knew me and trusted me. He knew I didn't want his job. He knew I didn't need to take his job. And so that's a huge thing. Trust and loyalty is huge in this business. So he trusted me, and I trusted him, how he treated me. And so that's really how it worked, and he gave me a lot of responsibility, and I was able to be very honest with him and dealing with him, so it worked out.
The jumper by Carl. Utah back in front.
It worked out well enough to lead the Jazz to 2 trips to the NBA Finals in 1997 and 98.
Cross-court Stockton, a three. It's there!
Though both were losses to the Bulls. Looking back to the 2 years that you went to the NBA Finals, have you ever gotten over that?
It's very difficult. In fact, I had, this new series that they had on the finals featuring the Chicago Bulls. I wouldn't watch it. I didn't want to watch it. I said I've already seen it. And then I was asked to do an interview from some different people. Do you want to talk about it? And I said no, I don't want to talk about it. I've lived it. I've been there. I've done it, and I want to get over it. And so that's kind of how I treat it. But yeah, it's very difficult because you don't get many chances.
And there hasn't been another trip since. In 23 seasons, Phil and Jerry coached over 1,800 games together. Jerry was the fiery one. Phil put out the fires.
That was an all-time, long marriage between the two of those guys. And it was powerful. When Jerry was done, Phil was done.
They were done when it all came undone on February 9th, 2011, in a game against, ironically, the Bulls.
That game, some things happened during the course of that game, and he came in halftime and he just said, he looked at Greg Miller was sitting over there, and he said, I've decided I'm not going to coach the team anymore. So we went in the coach's office, and Greg says, well, why don't you finish the game? And so after the game, he went in, said goodbye to the team, and we went in and met with Gail, Greg, Kevin O'Connor, myself, and Jerry. All met in the room, and he said, I'm gonna resign. And I said, and I'm going with him.
I had no idea. I'd been at the game that night, had no idea there was any friction, but I was just shocked.
And just like that, it was over. The 2 small-town farm boys would leave together and leave Jazz fans with an arena full of memories. Phil will never forget his coaching days with Jerry, the partner who passed away nearly 3 years ago. He's also very grateful for former Jazz owner Larry Miller.
Larry Miller was great to me, and he and Gail and the family have been great to me over the years. It was worth it to say.
Since his retirement, Phil was part of the Jazz broadcasting team for many years and was inducted into the Utah Sports Hall of Fame in 2011.
That's the Coach of the Year trophy.
He's still a big fan of the game, but just like Utah's All-Star Game 30 years ago, he won't be there this weekend. He's dealing with some serious family health issues.
Well, it's not easy, but we just tried to go day at a time. Ann's had cancer of her femur, and it broke. But she had treatment and is now walking with a cane and driving and shopping and cooking for me. So for a while I was doing everything around here. Now she's cooking, which is nice. So we've had our share, but you know what? I think some people have it worse, and we just move day to day. That's the only thing we can do. And our schnauzer just keeps us happy.
Now age 81, Phil spends his time with Ann and Penny walking near their Salt Lake City home, and summers with their sons Nate and Mitch at their Bear Lake cabin. They also love serving those living on the Navajo Nation near southern Utah, something they've done for many years.
Look at all that hair.
Phil also loves reflecting on the game that's been part of his life for nearly 75 years, a game that gave him so many lifelong friendships, especially one with the man he sat next to for over 2 decades.
And I've just gone through life, and I've had a lot of opportunities and a lot of good luck, and I've had some bad luck, but I've had really a lot of opportunities and that a lot of people don't get. So, and I've been happy with my family. My family's been great to me, and so it's been good.
For Beyond the Game, I'm Kathy Aiken for KSL.com.